Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Bryan Wetzel, a multi-industry entrepreneur, award-winning producer, and author. And he will learn from him about navigating entrepreneurship, transforming K-12 education, and bridging faith with science. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Well, thanks for having me on here. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the show, Bryan. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about faith. We'll talk about business. We'll talk about education, reinvention of education. All this we'll talk. But before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, your story, so that people know who they are listening.
Well, I grew up in a smaller kind of town, and as soon as I graduated from high school, I basically took off and decided I was going to be either a movie maker or, I wanted to be in television. And I indeed worked in production and had my own studio for about 25 years. And, during those journeys, a lot of what I did wasn't TV. It would be documentaries, could be corporate videos, could be many things. I did a lot of stuff for pharmaceutical companies and the History Channel and different places. And you learn a lot and you meet a lot of interesting people on your journey. And it was a great job for me. It suited me because I don't like doing the same thing, every day, the same subject matter. And so it allowed me to sort of move around and 1 month or two, you could be doing something for golf. And then maybe another 2 or 3 months, you're doing something for, soda company, then whatever. But you really get sort of your own education as you travel around meeting people. And actually the book that I wrote, Path to Faith Through Science and Common Sense, a lot of that was written about people that I met on my journey who, shocked me with stories of their faith or things that had happened to them, or in some cases, I would meet scientists and I would be kind of taken back because I think a lot of people have this perception that most scientists are not or are atheist, but that actually is not the case, as I found out over time. And getting to talk to a lot of these scientists it was very eye-opening. And but everything that I've done, so for instance, I have the book on education. I've been in, even though I was in production, I was always an entrepreneur. I owned a restaurant for a while. I own a gym now for people to work, to exercise. I've had more than one of those. I've just have always been an entrepreneur, loved trying new things, starting new businesses. One of the things that I did around 2009 or 10 was we started a company where we began to take all of the lessons that you learn from a little kid till you graduate high school and put them all in short videos, break them up into little clips. And we did that. It was called Scoobs, Skubes. And if you go to YouTube, you can see, I still have all 1,700 educational videos up there, all taught by teachers. But everything I did was just sort of part of my journey, things that I either ran into or were accidental. And because of that, both of the books I've written are things that are close to my heart. It would be very difficult to spend the time writing a book, for me anyway, on something that just didn't really matter to me. So both books are very close to my heart. They are both born out of my experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Bryan. So to understand Bryan better, what should the audience understand? Who is Bryan Wetzel? Is he an educator? Is he somebody, a multi-industry entrepreneur? Is he a producer? Is he an author? Who is Bryan?
I think right now I'm probably an entrepreneur and an author. I don't do as much, I do very little production anymore in TV. Um, just one of those things that as I've gotten towards my 50s, I'm now 57. I have just sort of pulled back on it. One of the things when you have a family, I didn't want to travel as much. And so that required me coming up with, some way to support myself. And we bought a gym that was local and restored it. And that's where I am right now. And then and the evenings and at night and on the weekends, I'm writing in most cases, either a book or I have a Substack and I just call the Substack stuff I've learned, because it's just about little things that I've learned throughout time. I just wrote one on my garden in the backyard, which has gotten a lot of views, but it was just sort of my journey and trying to figure out how to do it without using chemicals. And I was amazed at the response I got just from that article. But everything I write or do is just based on my experiences. But I would say I'm not a producer as much anymore. That was the old life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Obviously, one cannot keep on doing, everything all the time. So, for
Yes.
the audience, I want to understand is that what is it that you want to convey to the world? What is it that you are making an effort for? Is it for yourself or is it for the world? You know a lot of things. In that perspective, I want to understand you're
Right.
doing for the world.
So when I wrote the education book, which is about education in the United States, it was written from things I had seen, and I really felt that parents should know about some of the problems that needed to be fixed. And so I was really doing it because I wanted people to know the truth. When it comes to the book on faith, I don't proselytize, Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism. I really am just trying to reflect on the fact that there's more going on than just the physical world, and I lay that out through stories, true stories, science. I take it from the angle of scientific data as well as near-death experiences. Um, and then I just kind of talk about how your life is in most cases, even studies show this, that people who have faith that don't believe that they are the highest, they can be, are generally happier in life. To be able to understand that you are not, that this is not, everything around us has a spiritual aspect, in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely, Brian. So I want to understand from if you tell this thing in India, people will automatically understand that you under because we have been brought up that way. A lot of stories,
Mhm.
but when you talk about it, that there is more to our world than the physical side we see around us. What makes you think so? What is your experience about it? And
Mhm.
what is it that you want to indicate? Are there people here around us or things around us that we are not able to see? Help us understand from your perspective for the world.
Yeah. I do think that I believe that prayer works. And I have examples of that in my own life, but I will tell you one of the things that really spurred me to write the book and begin reading and studying more was my mom passed away of cancer in 2009, and it was devastating. She had battled cancer for a little over a year, and honestly, the treatments were probably harder on her than the cancer. And watching her go through that was rough, but I was going through a divorce that year, and things were tough and whatnot. And I remember I tell the story in the book. It's long. I'll try and shorten it, but that we were in a situation where I needed $100, and I could not get to the bank because all the courts had sort of locked everything down until there was a settlement made between us, and I needed it for my daughter. For she was in chorus, and that night I was at a block party in my neighborhood, and a lady who was very religious came over to me and gave me $100 bill. And I said, what is this for? And she said, God told me you needed this, and I don't question when God tells me something. And I sort of laughed for a minute, and I said, well, I can't take your $100. She said, you can give it to somebody else, but I have to give it to you because I was told to by my faith. And I remember that was I got a little weak kneed because I had just had a conversation in my house alone with a friend of mine from who lived far away. Skip ahead 2 or 3 years later, we had the housing bubble had sort of taken its toll. It wasn't a lot of work, and my wife and I were struggling a little bit financially. And I remember one day I got called into a company where I was consulting, and I didn't have enough money to get gas to come home. This would have been 2010, 11. And just jokingly, because I'm a sarcastic kind of person, when I was driving past the house with the lady who gave me the $100, I just looked up at the sky and said, God, if you got another one, could really use it today. Well, when I went to where I was consulting, I was asking a gentleman if I could borrow some money, and he said, well, I don't have any cash on me, but I can go get it if you really need it. And I didn't want to put him out, but we were talking in a room that was full of records for the building that we were in. They were doing upgrades. Some of these books hadn't been opened in 20 years. They had blueprints in them and whatnot. And just as he was flipping open an old book, he looked down and he said, you're not going to believe this. And he pulled out $100 bill. And that really made me weak kneed. I literally sat down in a chair behind me for a moment. And I did not tell the gentleman I was talking to for about a year later. But I believe that is an indication. I have friends who are atheists, or at least on the fence. And I always tell them, like, explain how that would have happened. And all they could say is, well, it was a very low probability event that happened to come together. And I'm okay. If you want to write it off like that, I just can't write that off as an accident twice. And I know through my time talking to people, and people email me now who buy the book, they will email me their own stories of things that happened after a loved one passed, or, even things that where someone hadn't passed away, but they were really in need and praying, and then something came through that just didn't seem like it was going to come through. And I consider those little miracles. I think that's where, God, or whoever you believe in is going on, is reaching down and letting you know that I'm watching over you.
Absolutely. So, does God watch everyone the same way, or was
I
He
don't
watching
have the
you?
answer to that. Yeah. So one of the things I know that, like, it's when you talk about this subject, it gets very hairy, because sometimes people, like, I had one person ask me one day, he said, so tell me why it is that someone else's prayer wasn't answered, but maybe yours was. I don't have an answer to that. That's unfortunately above my intellect when it comes to how all of this works. And I even tell people in the book, like, I don't have the answers to everything. I don't know how it all works, but what I do know is that there is something more going on than what we just experience around us in the physical world. I have to there.
Absolutely.
If you, I studied near-death experiences, and for the beginning of it, I thought that it was probably more of a dream. Many of the scientists who have worked on it for a long time were atheists or agnostic when they started it, and have now moved to at least believing that there is something that happens. We leave and we go, uh, to another plane of existence. You can say it's heaven, whatever you want to call it, that does appear to them that they cannot explain the events that have happened, that they have documented.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
And I
let me,
chronicle some of that in the book too.
of course, we'll come to the book also, uh, Brian. I want to understand one thing. Is is it that God helps those much more or watches those much more keenly, those who have a bit more wider vision for the world in what they are doing, trying to do? How do you look at that? Or is he also equally concerned about individuals who are just walking on their journey without anything else but what for their own good?
I believe that he, if we're calling him a he, an individual or whatever, I believe that God is watching for everybody equally. I don't think that he is just looking out for somebody who is trying to put out into the world, because I think that he also sees somebody who's struggling to take care of their family or just do better for their family. Or, we can argue whether it's a greedy or if they're just doing it for their own self enrichment. I do believe that what's in your heart and how you live your life does have an effect on, you know, whether it has an effect on your life spiritually here, or whether it is when you move on. I do believe that there's just something to that. And some of the times when you read people's experiences and a near death experience, they will often talk about how they are approached by a spiritual being who will tell them, hey, you did not treat my people very well. Or they will often talk about their life review, how they were able to feel the feelings of the people that they hurt. um I mean, there's a lot to it. It's very, very deep, and people have to just sort of put together their own you know idea of how everything works and comes together.
Absolutely, Brian. Let's now talk about education. You seem to be quite concerned about the education
Hmm.
system. How how scores and outcomes have been going in the wrong direction, and how people can save K-12 education. What are your views on this? What is it that you want people to take heed of?
Well, let me, in this full disclosure, let everyone know too that my wife is a public school teacher here, um, for quite a long time, and she was a big part of some of my experiences, but most of it was just traveling around my country, speaking to educators and people who were in higher ed. Uh, One of the things I will say is that it appears to me that in an attempt to not hurt the feelings of kids, that we are hurting them more in the long term. So in some states in our country, they have literally stopped grading, or you cannot fail. So if you answer no questions, you still get a D. Um, Maybe I'm just old school, but if you do not work, you have to work in life to obtain what you want. You have to, you got to really grind sometimes to get where you want to be. Unfortunately, life doesn't make it easy for everyone, only some people. Um, but I believe that by making it so easy that you do not have to step up and really try to get a better grade, that we're really harming kids and students in the long run. The second thing is there seems to be a problem where people in higher ed who often have not taught younger kids, but they believe that there's a one size fits all solution that they're trying to find. So if we teach, say, math in this one way, all of the students will get it. They'll do better. But that's not really practical. And when you talk to teachers, what they will tell you is that some students are more hands on, some like to work by themselves, some like to work in groups. You have to sort of let the teacher who has experience fit how they're educating to the classroom and the personalities in the classroom. But that's not what's happening. Is they're being told how to taught regardless. And in our country, charter schools do better statistically than public school. And there was a professor out of Stanford who studied this for quite a while. And what she determined was that in charter schools, they don't tell the teachers how to teach. They tell them what the students need to know by the end of the year. And then it is up to the teacher to get them there. That gives the teacher autonomy to mold the lessons to fit the population in her classroom. And that seems to be the same thing in private schools. The teachers are given autonomy to teach the way they feel is best. And if you have an experienced teacher, by the way, they already understand, if they've taught this lesson multiple years, they understand what questions the students are going to have ahead of time. They know the parts of the lessons that's going to trip them up a little bit, that they're going to struggle with or need more explanation than, say, other parts of the lesson. They've been through this with multiple classrooms. And so having good teachers is a big deal. One of the problems, too, in this country is that 50% of teachers coming out of college won't last 5 years in the profession. And that's kind of sad. You went all the way through school, you student taught, you did what's called TOS, where you sit in the classroom and observe. You're not really getting paid for 1 year of that as you're interning. And you went through all of that. And then after 3 to 4 or 5 years, you decided it's not worth it. And so what you end up with is a population of teachers who are also not as experienced. There's so many easy fixes to this, but it just appears that most people want to put a Band-Aid over most of the problems and not really address them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's now come to your book, your latest book, A Path to Faith Through Science and Common Sense.
Mm-hmm.
What have you discussed in this? Have you discussed faith? Have you discussed science? Have you discussed education? Tell us a bit more about those. You mentioned it earlier in the show, but now let's focus on this. What is it this book is all about?
So this book is my way of trying to move people towards understanding that if you don't believe there's a creator, well, let me give you some real scientific data. And let's take it from the creation of the universe, the earth, human beings. I have referenced in there over 287 citations from very, very qualified scientists in evolutionary biology to archaeology to even just engineering, but who go through statistically how our universe, the earth, the elements in our earth all came together. And we lay it out in there, what the odds are of all of those different things coming together just by chance. The next chapter is stories about things that have happened to me or people that I know. The third chapter is near-death experiences. And this was spurred on, by the way. I used to work with a young man who rode a motorcycle. He got rear-ended from behind, and he was they put him in. He really had terrible head trauma. They put him in an induced coma for a few days in the hospital. When he came out of it, he looked at his wife and said, "You're going to have our son." And she said, "I'm not pregnant." And he sort of dipped out again and went to sleep. And they just assumed that it was delirium from the accident and whatnot. But when he came back awake again a few hours later, he repeated it, but he repeated it in front of the doctor in the hospital. And the doctor in the hospital said, "Well, we can check." So they did the test, and sure enough, she was pregnant. And the reason he said he knew this was that while he was in his coma, he was taken upward and sort of given a tour of what he believed is heaven by an angel. And she's the one that told him that you need to go back because you need to raise your son. You're about to have a child. And I just remember hearing that when I was in my early 20s going, that's crazy. Like it's hard to write that off as just an accident. And then, you know what, in the book, at the University of Virginia here in America, they have a whole wing called the study of perceptual studies. And the near-death experience part was sort of pioneered by, I believe, Dr. Grayson. Dr. Grayson tells a story. As a doctor, he grew up atheist. His parents were both scientists, and he was in the hospital. He gets so he's a psychologist. He gets a pager beep that someone tried to kill themselves and they had been brought to the hospital. So he goes to her room and she's asleep. She's out. She's hooked up to all of the equipment, trying to get her, healed. So he goes down the hall, he said about 100 yards, and talks to the roommate who had called the police. And the roommate, they both have a conversation for about 10 minutes about what happened. And then he goes back and checks on her. She's still out. So he figured, I'll come back in the morning and talk to her. Well, in the morning when he comes back, he walked in and said, "Hello, I'm Dr. Grayson." And she said, "I know who you are. I was watching you talk to my roommate from above," which was been down the hall in a building. And this perplexed him for years. He just could not figure out an explanation in the physical world how that would be possible. He was literally able to tell him what the conversation was. And that's how his journey began. But it's a similar thing where you hear the story and you try and make sense of it in your head, and it's just, it's hard. Now, I will tell you a funny story. I got invited on another podcast. It was an atheist, and he wanted to challenge me on. Then when I told him that story, he couldn't explain it, but all he would say is that, well, how come we just go to that it's spirituality or it's a spirit? And I said, you know what, because that's really the only thing that I can come up with that makes sense.
Absolutely, Brian. So, in your book, how have you dealt with all these things? Is there a conclusion, or is it your questions for the people to understand? What do you think we are here for? Is it our end of our journey, or is it the middle of our journey that we are here on this earth, or is it the beginning of our journeys for all of us that we are? Whoever believes this,
right? I think it's the middle of our journey, to be honest. I almost believe that. So I don't know if you know what the Amish communities are here. So they live with no electricity. They still ride horse and buggies. They have shunned modern life. One of the things the Amish community does is when you turn 18, they kick you out of the community and you have to go away for a year. and you have to find your way back to them. In other words, if you like the modern world better, then you stay there. But we want you to come back. We want you to come back to where it's family is and what they consider a more holy life. It's kind of that way, the way I see it, that we come to Earth. People want to claim or complain that why would God allow a God allow things on Earth to be bad or to people to be murdered or whatnot. You know, I think that this is where we come to be tested before we return. And there's also a lot of one of the interesting things I read from other people's accounts was that uh, there's a couple of them actually where someone was told that this was the path you chose before you went to Earth, and that's very interesting. That maybe you choose the life that you're going to take on when you come here. And then does that mean that does that confirm that there's reincarnation? I don't know. There's a lot of evidence for it. I've read some really, I did not cover it in the book because I don't know enough about it. But there are some crazy stories of kids who, 6 or 7, remembering a completely different life that is verifiable. A lot of this, though, one of the things that I talk about in the book, there's a book out there called The Irreducible Mind. It's very big. It's very scientific. It's difficult to read sometimes and always understand some of the terms they're using, but it's scientists talking about metaphysical things. And they're literally begging the science community at the beginning of the book to dig into some of this stuff and try and, solve it, get some data or whatever. But oftentimes scientists, when they can't figure it out, they write it off. So when I was telling a gentleman who is a scientist the story of the $100, he said to me, I don't know the answer, but I can guarantee you there's an answer in the physical world. And I said, okay, but how would that work? Because we're talking about, the way I gave him the longer version, and he just couldn't explain it, but he was certain there has to be an explanation in the physical world. I think if you don't want to believe, then I'm not going to be able to convince you. But hopefully my book at least inches you closer to taking a look around and realizing that this beautiful earth and world that we have, I don't believe got here by accident.
Absolutely. And maybe because we are still in our infancy in terms of the strides we have made in terms of science. Maybe there will be a day soon where we will have enough equipments, just like we measure energy, we will be able to see also the kind of energy, the kind of other things that we talked about beyond our physical world. And that is the time we will perhaps be able to understand things better, communicate things better, and perhaps understand our whole purpose of being on this earth in a much more wider sense. What is your sense? This is my last question.
I absolutely believe that. I also believe that the world is better if you don't believe that you are the highest being there is. There's something comforting to believing that there is someone bigger than you, something bigger than you that is looking out for you. And whether, whether you believe it or not, I do believe that there is something bigger that is watching over us. And whether it is a God, whether it's the parents that have passed on, I do 100% believe that this is not that what we see around us is not the end when we pass on. And I think the evidence for that, by the way, the book is very detailed. I would tell people this: the first chapter is full of statistics and numbers. If that's not your thing, move on to the rest of the chapters. They're not as science heavy, but I wanted to come out of the gate in that first chapter and challenge, how the universe arrived, how the planet arrived, how people, if you are a pure atheist, you believe that human beings sprung up from a primordial soup of elements that they can't reproduce at the moment, but they believe that must be how, like planting a seed, we just suddenly sprung up into people or into animals that became people. We challenge that notion in the book, and it comes straight from other scientists. It's not my data.
Absolutely. There's so much to learn about all this from you, Bryan, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn more from you, about you, learn from your books. What's the best way for them to do so?
Well, I'm on all the majors, Amazon, Apple. You can get it in ebook. You can get it on Barnes and Noble. I'm on many of the bookstores that are also in Europe. You should be able to find me pretty much anywhere. If you want a physical copy, there's only a few of the stores that will send it, but all the stores carry me in an ebook format.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.